So it's called the White Privilege Research Room, and it was a 10-day residency here at Dream Farm Commons. And the whole premise, the idea behind it was just to interview people of all walks of life about how they experience being in proximity to white culture and white privilege, and specifically like how they feel that in their bodies. I understand the project itself is creating taking the gallery space and making it into a living room, and the idea was to have like a comfortable place to have uncomfortable conversations.
Hi, my name is Horace Washington. And I'm here at the White Privilege Research Room. Today I'm going to talk about a little bit about U.S. history, my family history, and my personal history also. If you didn't have an ethnicity, what would you be? Non-existent. My family on the Washington side, my great-grandfather named himself George Washington, and his wife's name was Clarissa. They nicknamed her Classy. Mm-hmm. On my mother's side, they are the Tuckers. I assume that my great-grandfather Tucker was from England, either in Virginia on a land grant, indentured servant, or maybe a criminal, or maybe alcoholic, or maybe a combination of all of those things. And around 1919, when the black soldiers were coming home from World War I in France, the Harlem Hellfighters, there was what was called Red Summer, and hundreds of black GIs were murdered and lynched. And in Oklahoma, there was an area called the Black Wall Street, which was a white riot that destroyed, burned it down, and there were even incendiary devices dropped from airplanes to destroy that black culture that was very prosperous at that time. Horace Ball Washington, his middle name was Ball. My middle name, my mother changed to Baldwin since she couldn't stand Ball. I learned recently that one of the largest slave-owning families in the South was the Ball family in several states in the South. My grandfather pulled some deals with the principal of the high school because in 1919 was that red summer. He pulled some deals that enabled my dad to finish high school and his brother. And in 1919, my father was on the North Carolina football team. I've seen pictures of him with the skin helmet on. Pretty funny, I used to laugh about it when I was a kid. And also his brother later got a master's degree in music and was subsequently run out of the state of Virginia because they couldn't tolerate that. So my father and his cousin, George Washington, moved to New York City to work on the construction of the George Washington Bridge. You can keep track of all that with me. Shortly after that period, he moved to Atlantic City in New Jersey, and then he called for my mother to come up from Virginia. And they started a little soup stand, and that was the beginning of the family restaurant business. We were in the restaurant business for almost 80 years. The boardwalk at that time, the hotels did not allow minorities, and that included Jewish people. But in the wintertime, Jewish people were allowed to stay in the hotels. And in the winter, you could see a lot of Hasidic people walking up and down the boardwalk. They used to say in the press in those days that the reason why all of the basketball players were Jewish is because Jewish people had a propensity to play basketball, not because that they couldn't get into medical school or law school. At that time, I would visit my grandfather, Tucker, and his wife was named Vanny. I don't remember his first name. We used to just call him Tucker, Grandpa Tucker. But my one adventure with him when I was about 4, he would come up to me and he'd look around and see if there weren't any women around and he'd say, "You want to go fishing, boy?" He says, "Yeah, Grandpa, yeah." So he'd take a pin, a piece of string, and take me down to the pond where I'm not supposed to be, show me how to throw the worm out on the pin and the string, and then he would look around and disappear. Then another time he would say, "You want to ride a horse, boy?" I'd say, "Yeah, Grandpa." And he'd put me on the plow horse, and he told me to hold on to the hair of the horse's neck and don't let go. He smacked the horse on the butt, and off I went, riding on a horse. That was the last time I was on a horse, too, by the way. And another time, he'd say, "You want to shoot a gun, boy?" "Yes, Grandpa." And he'd look around, make sure that the women weren't there. And we had a .22 bolt-action rifle. And he set a can up on a post and said, "Don't shoot at anything but the can." Then he disappeared. So there I am, shooting away, and I can't understand why I'm not hitting the can. So at one point, I saw the can move just a little bit. So, oh, that's strange. So I walked over to the can and discovered that it had lots of holes in it. The .22 bullets were just going straight through the can without the can even moving. It was quite an adventure to have the old guy show me how to be independent. I had 4 brothers who served in World War II. One was in the Air Force, one was in the Navy, and 2 were in the Army. Fortunately, they all came back from the war, and by the time I came around in the 1950s, they were still living in my father's house, because for black GIs up until the 50s, there were no benefits, no college money, no jobs, and so there they were. We all lived from working in the restaurant, and the old man drove the taxi cab also in the winter when we were not open. One at a time, in the 50s, they got married, got jobs in the post office, and got college degrees and whatnot. And at some point, we moved to a larger restaurant, which is on the cover of my niece's book. I'll show you the detail. In those days, a lot of the big stars appeared, used to come to the restaurant, because Atlantic City was a 24-hour town with clubs and music in the summertime. And Jersey Joe Walcott used to come to the restaurant, the world's champ heavyweight boxer of the world. And I was about 4. I would rush up to him and spar with him And all I had to do was knock Jersey Joe Walcott out, and I would be the world's champion. So one time I rushed at him, and he put his palm up, and my forehead hit his palm. And man, that hurt, but I was not going to cry in front of the world champ. But I was also disillusioned because I was not going to be the world champ. I wasn't going to get to knock him out that day, so it's pretty funny. And now I'm going to talk about a book about a man named Robert Williams. So he had gone to Cuba and met Castro and talked to him and communicated. And so he, one night, took his wife and his two sons and one of the machine guns, and they drove up to Canada. I think it was Montreal. And a Cuban freighter came. So at one point, he had a falling out with Castro because he said that Fidel was a racist. So he moved to China, where he had another good friend from his correspondence, Mao. And he and his family lived in China for a number of years. The Chinese did a full feature film about him being toured around China. And finally, at one point, he left China because he said Mao was mistreating his people. And he moved to Vietnam, where he also lived with a gentleman called Ho Chi Minh. And he was in Vietnam for a number of years. And then finally, when Kissinger and Nixon were about to normalize relationships and trading with China, Robert Williams was pardoned, brought back to the United States as a consultant to the president. So much for that. So there he is, an American hero who most of us don't know anything about.
A lot of questions about where it will live or how it will get published, and what I've been telling people is two things. One, that this was publishing it. I don't know if you can see on the walls, but there's some of the text of the interviews have been painted in clear gloss on the walls, and so that was part of the idea, was to share with people some of the content, but to do it in a way where it was visceral. So it was about, again, being in your body and experiencing those bits of information that were gathered. I think because it's so fresh. Yeah, just thinking about moving forward, like, you know, what shape does the information want to take? Because I felt really strongly that it doesn't need to be an article, it doesn't need to be published in a journal. I like the idea of, like visual scholarship. I think expanding the notions of what is like a valid or accepted or respected form of publishing, if that makes sense. So I think putting it on the walls can be just as important and prestigious or whatever as putting it in a journal that somebody can hand you that's, you know, printed on fancy paper.